Welcome, everybody. My name is Jelani, and welcome back to the 10th episode of the DeSci Rising series put on by DeSci World, where, as always, our goal here is to provide an opportunity for many of the wonderful projects on our growing DeSci World dashboard to just formally introduce themselves, update their progress, highlight their achievements, and just generally engage with both the DeSci World and wider DeSci community. Now, as always, the goal behind all this is that at DeSci World, we very much believe that more than the tech, more than the funding, it is the community and individuals using these tools that will actually usher in many of the changes that we are looking for DeSci to bring to the various legacy STEM industry. Now, in today's episode, I have the very great pleasure of speaking with Jason Barkaloo, who is the founder and CEO of Open Therapeutics, which is a platform that leans very heavily on the principles of open science by providing students and researchers, but also potentially science curious laymen, with free tools, services, intellectual property grants, and awards for collaborating and advancing health science innovation. And so, without further ado, Jason, welcome. And thank you for taking the time to help us learn more about the Open Therapeutics platform today.
Hey there, Jelani. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, really an honor, and especially since I should be interviewing you. Your background is very impressive, and the crowd, I would hope, would recognize how lucky we are to have you hosting something like this and taking time out of your very busy day. Amazing background. I'm always impressed when I see that. So I I'm really the background on this for Open Therapeutics is kind of interesting. Open Therapeutics actually started as a synthetic biology company doing lab-based work, and our claim to fame, this is I don't know 7 to 10 years ago, uh, was genetically engineering a Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which is a BSL2 organism, but incredibly robust industrially to clean wastewater and it simultaneously generate electrical current, direct electrical current. And we had some very significant breakthroughs on that. And we ended up selling that to a publicly traded company. And that patent was awarded in almost a year and went through national security review. That kind of put us on a different level about what we were capable of doing and accomplishing. We then got a National Science Foundation grant to utilize that same concept to kill tumor cells. So, in essence, the organism would be tuned to find these particular tumor cells and eat them, lyse them, kill them, and then eventually starve to death when all the tumor cells are gone and be cleared out by the WBCs. And so the National Science Foundation was really fascinated with this, and they gave us some money. We did uh, phase one in vivo trial, really an in vitro trial, and we had really breakthrough results. And they wanted to fund our second level of development. And I had to make a very important decision at that point, whereby the amount of money it takes to bring a pharmaceutical to the world through the US anyway, through the FDA, this is 12 to 15, and this is a Tufts University study. It's 12 to 15 years, about $2 billion with a 93% failure rate. Add to that that we were talking about a bacterium that is also known as a pathogen. If you have cystic fibrosis, you get this organism in your lungs, it's kind of a death sentence. Uh, can't really get rid of it. Uh, I think our climb up that hill was going to be very significant. So I had this idea that a good chunk of the intellectual properties that are out there are actually unused. They never go anywhere. They cost the organization a lot of money in maintenance fees, prosecution fees, and then it sits there in the portfolio and doesn't go anywhere. I think there's about 4 trillion, estimated $4 trillion worth of unused intellectual property sitting on shelves. So I got the idea of, okay, let's take all of that unused intellectual property and put it under a Creative Commons 4.0 share alike license and make it available for free to researchers around the world. All we need to do was create an environment in which to take these intellectual properties and house them and make them freely available. And so this was a very significant idea. I went to my community and said, hey, here's this idea that I have. Let's pivot from uh, developing these technologies to enabling the rest of the world to develop these technologies. And I believe so strongly in it that we'll take this very technologies that we've developed and we'll open them up for free to the global community and let anybody be able to take this recipe and go out and develop these potential technologies. All of my stakeholders agreed that this was a very interesting idea and that we should go down that path. So open therapeutics is the terminal end of taking these unused intellectual properties and making them freely available to the rest of the world. And we coined that at the time as open science. And when we started this, open science was a very nascent area. If you did a search on open science 4 or 5 years ago, not a lot came up and almost nothing came up formally. So since then, it's changed dramatically. Open science now has gained significant footing through part of the open science environment is open access, which is the idea of making these journal articles freely available to the world. So open science and open access have been holding hands through it. CERN has a very significant open science endeavor, and not to be out undone, NASA has dedicated 16 million, I think it's $16 million US dollars to their TOPS program, which is their open science program. So anybody that's interested, that was just launched a few months ago. And now you have very significant organizations around the world. Max Planck is doing it, CERN, uh, there's NASA, there's a number of organizations that are doing it. And we're actually partnered with a university in South Korea to help start an open source, open science movement there. So we've gone from not seeing anything in open science to now we're past really, I think, at the tipping point and moving past. Concurrent to this, over the last year or so, the blockchain world has really embraced open science. People like Jelani, like you, Jelani, uh, have come along and said, you know, open science has this tremendous ability to change the way science is done around the world for the better. And so the blockchain people, many of them highly qualified as clinicians and bench level researchers, PhDs, have moved out of academia or companies, and they've moved into this decentralized science arena, DeSci, which again can be thought of as a pillar for open science. So you have open access as a pillar, now you have DeSci as a potential pillar. And with a friend of mine, a couple friends of mine, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, we founded a blockchain for science Telegram group. And so we were kind of like maybe we're 20 of us in that thing. And I wouldn't say that it was active at all because it wasn't. Over the last year, since the DeSci movement has started, it's ballooned to almost 8 million members, or 800 members, sorry, 800 members. But it's not about the numbers, it's about the quality. It's very significant clinicians, PhDs, senior researchers who are now members in that community. And so the quality of this community, this Telegram blockchain for science community, is relatively significant and it's growing at a kind of a spooky rate considering when we started with it. So, as an overview, I think that we're down to a point in the open science world with DeSci where we can start breaking down these silos that are existing and create an interdisciplinary fabric where many of the fields have overlap, but there's no way to really drive that overlap in a way that the global research community can interact with them. And so I think this fabric where you have all these different threads that now can make up a single piece of fabric, I think that's where we potentially are now with open science, DeSci, open access. And I think with that, that's kind of a good overview of where we have been and where we're looking to go.
That's a very great and comprehensive kind of trajectory from, the more siloed perspective of drug and therapy development all the way to this open access initiative, right? I think that kind of experience in transitioning and moving through these different states of science is actually very invaluable, and it's very important to kind of directing us where we think, or where I think we need to go as a space. So thank you for that, Jason. And there's actually a few things that you touched on that I think are worth going into deeper discussion before we go into the actual nitty and gritty of open therapeutics. But you mentioned at the beginning that, like, after you ran face forward into the commentary of the valley of death, what is known as the valley of death. And this is, for those of you who are not aware, this is this point in development where science is very wrought with failure, and so it costs a lot. The risk reward ratio is very heavily tilted towards risk, right? It costs a lot, and the chances of you failing are very high, right? And this makes sense, and is kind of what underpins the lack of funding, or these projects get stuck in this valley, what we're known as the valley of death, where they don't get funded and they don't get pushed forward, even though they might have some merit. Now, I understand that. But then you mentioned that there's a slew of these, IP patented either drugs or technologies that kind of just sit shelved on, away and not being used. And there could be opportunities to maybe repurpose these or look at these at different angles to be applied as, novel therapeutics, or some form of innovation that can be driven, extracted from these therapies. Can you go a little bit more into detail, um, about how you see that working in the context of open science? Is that
Oh,
something that, yeah, is that something that is somewhere we should
yeah.
focus on?
Yeah, you kind of have opened a rabbit hole here, so I'm going to try to keep this at a high level and give us some room for other things, but I'll give a great example. So I'm very fortunate that one of our scientific advisors is Dr. Tim Kripe, and he's the chair of pediatric oncology and hematology at Nationwide Children's Hospital at The Ohio State University. And a few years ago, Dr. Kripe saw this work that we did on these cholesteatoma tumors, this inner ear tumor, utilizing this genetically engineered Pseudomonas aeruginosa as a lytic agent. And he saw this technology and came to me and said, "Hey, I've got this thing that I'm really interested in seeing if you'd like to open this up and make it freely available to the world." And when he laid it out to me, I was flabbergasted. Uh, he had published results in Cell, and they were in vivo results, mouse results. He had attenuated a herpes simplex virus and gave a herpes simplex virus infection to MMP expressing cancers. Similar to what we had worked on with a bacterial agent, his viral vector goes in and lytically destroys these cells by going in and bursting the cells from the inside out. And it's very selective. So, literally giving a herpes infection to a tumor cell. So, he said, "Would you be interested in opening this technology up?" Oh, of course, my chin hit the ground and forced four more stitches there. And I said, "Absolutely." So we started an intellectual property technology transfer discussion. And I have tremendous respect and credit to Nationwide Children's Hospital because they took Dr. Kripe's wishes about making it open and available and accommodated for that. And that's a big deal when a major research organization says, okay, we're not looking to make billions of dollars on this. Rather, we're willing to make it freely available to the rest of the world and let them push that technology forward. So fast forward a little bit, and a small 12-year-old girl has glioblastoma. For those of you that don't know, this is a very deadly brain cancer. Um, and this young girl had it. She'd already been catheterized and was kind of on the last steps. There wasn't much more she could do. Fortunately, her father was fairly wealthy, and he was willing to do whatever it could take to utilize this particular herpes simplex lytic oncolytic. It's called an oncolytic virus. Take this oncolytic uh, technology, move it to a India-based oncology research institute, and move that into a drug and let it literally be used on her. Unfortunately, due to the amount of time and effort regulatorily, she passed away before it could ever happen. But this is a great example where an open technology was all of a sudden being fast tracked as a potential drug opportunity to help somebody in the world that ordinarily would never have been helped. So I think, Jelani, that is a phenomenal example of a technology that can be taken off the shelf by the global community and let them collaborate, let them drive it forward. And then a generics manufacturer can step in and say, hey, we'll productize this and we'll sell it around the globe for 5 pennies each, and everybody benefits. The generics manufacturer makes money, the inventors get something, the licensing company. The fact that I mentioned Nationwide Children's Hospital, Ohio State, is free brand for those guys, right? Because it's pretty significant technology that they made freely available to the world. The inventor wins, in this case, Dr. Cripe, because his brand wins, and he gets continued R01 support from the National Institutes of Health because of these considerable things where he says, I've opened this up and allowed it freely available to the world. So that I think that's a great example of one.
No, that's a beautiful example of one. And the way you tie them together is, speaks to the ethos of everybody wins when everybody has access and has the ability to input and maybe change and tweak and apply these technologies that were often, de developed in a unidirectional fashion and making it multi-directional, right? I think that's the one of the beautiful things of open science that we don't talk about is many of these therapies, they're very targeted, but they're not targeted by nat um, by fundamentals. They're targeted because that's where people are looking at. But if you open it up and allow people to look at it in different perspectives, different angles, you can probably eke out a lot more value from these siloed entities, these siloed therapies that can be applied and help everybody around. I think your story,
Right.
the one that you just talked about, is a beautiful example of that. So thanks for that, John.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there's a couple of things that are, historically fascinating about this. People have a tendency to compare us to Linux, right? Where we're taking these technologies, platforming them, making them available to developers around the world to push them forward. And as you know, none of us hire developers if we don't see them on GitHub. There's just no reason not to, right? And so these researchers now can work in an open environment and be seen. And this is particularly important for those researchers in places like Africa, Asia, Latin America, where there are a lot of highly qualified researchers and students that never get seen. And now all of a sudden they can come in and they can do what they love to do. And now they can be seen for potential employment, career, gigs, grants, whatever it is. And so this is a very significant thing. And this existed long before Linux and open source. In the 1600s, a very famous scientist said, if I see far into the future, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And that was no less than Sir Isaac Newton, that coined essentially open science through the Royal Society long before open source ever came into even thinking, right? But then something happened in the West, particularly in the United States, called Bayh-Dole. And the Bayh-Dole legislation allowed institutions, primarily academic institutions, including publicly funded institutions, to lock down the intellectual properties developed in those institutions and generate royalties off of those now lockdown technologies. And that changed the landscape of the way open science was done going forward from Bayh-Dole. So you think about polio, right? Salk and Sabin. These were open science driven events. All of these things, Pasteur's work, all of this major work that was done before was all done in an open science world. And it wasn't until Bayh-Dole came along that all of a sudden we pivoted to a closed science environment. So open science is not new. And what's happening now is that through the focus on unused intellectual properties, we're actually able to kickstart the open science world again. Only this time, we're not looking to compete against closed science, rather create a parallel path where we say we're not against patents, we're not against locking down. You can still do that if you want. But however, if you choose, you can go the open science route and you get significant benefits from that, right? We know that researchers that open access their work get higher impact factors, H factors, citation factors as a result of being open access. So there's tremendous value to that. And now the researchers are able to unlock that by putting a system, and hopefully we can get a system of standards in place for open science and DeSci.
For sure. I think, alongside creating a parallel infrastructure that allows us to not compete, as you say, but work alongside or in a different direction, provide an alternative to this more competitive framework. I also hope it provides a parallel culture because I think that, many of the scientists who operate in the current paradigm, they don't necessarily inherently want to silo their data. It's just almost part of there's almost a culture that kind of develops around it. There's a mindset that kind of infiltrates and is not insidious, but implements itself in people's mind frame. And I'm hoping that this alternative that you speak on, that you are developing, that we are developing, that so many are developing, opens up and changes this culture to make it such that, yeah, it's like it's almost second nature. Science began as an open science, from an open science perspective, from an open access perspective. And we're just moving it back to this less competitive, more open, collaborative space. Now, Jason, you
Right.
talk about, the impact of this on intellectual property. And you yourself, the Open Therapeutics platform, as you mentioned, operates under a shared commons 4.0 license. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is? Because I have never, before going into due diligence on you guys, I had never seen that before, and what the actual impact of that has on projects and therapies that are coming out of open science. Open therapeutics.
Yeah, so I'm I don't want to say an old hand, but when you think about me relative to uh, the young folks in our space, I'm kind of on the older side of things, and I'm almost 60. So there's downsides to that, but there's some significant upsides to it. And one of them is that I've been around long enough and I've been in multiple fields. Yeah, I did a career in the Army and ended up running a major research laboratory out of the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. So I've had a very varied background across a number of areas, and as a result of that, I'm able to bring those experiences to the table. And one of the things that I had worked in on one of my prior startups was the development of content. I had a publishing company, and it was the development of content in an open access model. And at the time, open access didn't exist uh, as a system. And that then took me into a licensing model known as Creative Commons, which is I don't have a dog in the fight organizationally with Creative Commons. It's a not-for-profit, and they do accept donations, and it's a really critical organization for the standardization of licenses. So anybody that has an interest in the way licenses are done, I highly recommend taking a look at Creative Commons .org. I'm sure it's .org, creativecommons.org, and look at the different types of licenses that these folks have templatized so that when you put up a picture on, on a Instagram site, what you're giving up in a licensing perspective vis-a-vis if you put it on your own website and how you can give that away under whatever license it is you choose. So we ended up uh, selecting the Creative Commons 4.0 share alike, which simply says anybody can copy and redistribute the material in any medium or format. It's pretty simple. And anybody can remix, transform, build, whatever, and you can do it even commercially. And that's really critical because Jelani can go out now. He can it can get a micrograph of a brain stem, and then he can literally put that up in an open environment, and then somebody else can come in, take that photograph and then that micrograph and commercialize it, so long as they attribute Jelani for that work. That opens it up for things like NFTs. And so I sit and I kind of scratch my head because I see all of this minutia going on in the background about NFTs and who's controlling the rights and all that. And I just kind of go, guys, there's Creative Commons. I mean, that licensing discussion has already been taken care of. All you have to do is just step in and say, oh, it's a Creative Commons 1.0 or a 2.0 or 3.0 or 4.0, whatever licenses you choose to make your work available under. And that solves all the licensing troubles. But the younger folks in the crowd, or those folks that are new to things like digital assets, don't really have an understanding of these licensing models that already exist in the intellectual property world.
And that's a very good point because I think if we were to take a consensus of the average age of individuals in this
Feeding
current
the wheel.
space, I would I would agree with you that it probably errs towards the much younger than the much older. And so this breadth of
Right,
experience that
right.
you yourself and a few others have is kind of integral and very much necessary for these kind of things. And so, now that you talk about NFTs, this Creative Common backed NFTs, is this potentially an alternative to the IP NFT that is
Yeah,
currently exists
yeah,
in the space?
absolutely.
Okay.
The great thing about, and I sit in on, travel to the DeSci conferences, and this invariably turns into a conversation about, the rights and the intellectual properties and patentability, copyrights, trade secrets, and all that. And I consistently say, guys, take a look at Creative Commons. The licensing model is there. You just have to pick which one it is you want to do. It's already there, and older people like us can help bring those kinds of things to the table. So I'm not sitting down doing Solidity. I'm not writing code anymore. Those days are behind me. But I can bring these other things to the table that can change significantly and short circuit these very long, uh, redundant conversations and really help streamline us and move us forward in a more organized and standards driven way.
And that is exactly what we need. Like you said, right? We don't have any SOPs for DeSci, really. We have certain frameworks, we have certain infrastructures that are being built, we have certain true primitives that are being built, but we still lack a lot of directionality and standardization. And I'm very happy to have experienced individuals like yourself and a few others to kind of help guide and help us work our way through a little bit of the noise that we can sometimes get caught up in. Um, and so that's great. And so let's take it back and talk actually about the Open Therapeutics platform and Therapoid. So I'm a researcher. Let's say I'm a researcher, and I'm marveled by what the prospect of working with Open Therapeutics. What is the onboarding like? What is the actual process of me getting onto the platform, and what is accessible to me? What is offered to me?
Right. So, so let me first start off with disclaimer. We are a for-profit company, but we act as a benefit corp, what's known as a B Corp. And I want to express why that is. In order for us to operate as an entity, it's all about money. At the end of the day, you have to have money in order for an organization to operate. Due to my experience, I have a significant investor base. For me to try to go out and raise money as a not for profit is a very limited. number of potential funders for that. And so you run around with your tin cup doing nothing but raising money so that an organization can operate almost always in an unsustainable way, right? The nice thing about being for profit is that you can bring in investors, which is a significantly big population relative to grant funders. And you can bring in grant funders as well. And so you have a much bigger catchment of capital that you can bring into the organization to move that organization forward. Now, the question is, how do you behave as an organization? For us, we do act as a not for profit. We are interested in multiple bottom lines. And almost exclusively my investor base, who I'm extremely proud of, are focused mostly on doing a good for the world. And then if they get a financial ROI, they're fine with that. And so the moniker that we have is do well by doing good. And so my investors say, yeah, if we make money, that's wonderful. But at the same time, we're able to help that 12-year-old girl get potentially a life-saving treatment. And so I want to express that in the sustainable business model that we have here is, and this plays right into the kind of company we are, is that by bringing those researchers in those economically developing areas such as Africa, Asia, and Latin America, by bringing them into an area where they can be seen, they can be recruited for opportunities, and we get paid to enable those researchers and students to get recruited. It's great for the researchers, right? Because the researchers get opportunities they ordinarily wouldn't work. It's great for us because we get revenues that now help us be sustainable. And it's great for the recruiters of the organizations that need STEM candidates or whatever research candidate they want, because they now have a central place to go get them. A GitHub-like environment for the scientific community, which no longer does not exist. It's not there. So we put ourselves in that position to be sustainable by doing that. So I wanted to put that disclosure out there, let everybody know that we have a for-profit, we do have investors, but we do have a do well by doing good philosophy as a B Corp. So
Wait, Jason,
Therapoid,
wait. 1 second, 1 second. Before you proceed, because I think this is actually a really interesting point, and I definitely want to get into Therapoid, but I think for the space, this question that I'm going to have to is maybe pertinent. So most of the DeSci space operates via a DAO infrastructure. Now, those are not
right?
necessarily the most powerful entities in space, but most people are operating through DAOs.
That's
Do
correct.
you believe that the B Corp structure is actually that DAOs should be or should lean into becoming B Corps?
Okay, so I have worked on this model quite a bit, actually, probably more than I should. Uh, but I look that there is a hybrid model here. And DAOs, I think there's a place for them in this decentralized organizational style where a lot can be accomplished if there's good guidance. Leadership is always the underlying issue with decentralized entities. Leadership is the bottom line. No leadership, nothing happens. So one of the great things about an organized organization is that it's forced to have leadership. And leadership at the end of the day helps move things along. They help make decisions. If I have a complaint about Dallas's decision making is not clean and it's not expeditious. And so I think that you're going to see a DAO B Corp model that's going to materialize, whether it's in Wyoming or Switzerland. I think you're going to see a corporate, for-profit, sustainable model that acts as a benefit corp and utilizes a DAO in its development side of the equation. And that community is rewarded, its efforts are rewarded through the for-profit arm that's out in front. So think of the Red Hat Linux model, where Red Hat was essentially the commercialization point of the Linux development world. And I think you're going to see a formalized model that's going to materialize that will be recognized by regulatory agencies in many parts of the world.
Now that's a whole other can of fish of topics with regards to how we operate vis-a-vis regulation. But I'll leave that for
Yeah.
hopefully a future discussion that we can touch on. So I just want to summarize, and I'm going to shout this out to all the DAOs and all the entities that exist out there. If you are starting a DAO, or if you want to build a community, an impact community, as in this DeSci space, I hope that everybody who is helping with this understands that there is a necessity for organizational leadership for it to be successful, right? This is an underlying thing that all humanity kind of has come to the point. You need organizational leadership for it to be successful. Now, that all being said, and without to take too much more time off of Therapoid itself, please go into continue with what exactly is the Therapoid platform.
Right. So the platform is essentially designed to be an end-to-end ecosystem whereby we provide those intellectual properties. So we go out to organizations around the world, corporate, government, academic, and we look to collect those unused intellectual properties. And that becomes the starting point on the platform. And then we buttress that with grants. And so we collect grants and we help recycle grants. And I'm going to take just a little deviation for a second here. An R01 grant application submitted to the National Institutes of Health is months' work of work, months to put it together. And the amount of intellectual property that's embedded within that application is significant. It goes to NIH. They get a peer review evaluation of this application, and they may come back and say this is highly rated, but unfunded due to budgetary constraints. All of that work is flushed. One of the things that this platform will enable is that that researcher can post that grant application, and then one of the partnering grant organizations can say it's already been vetted by the NIH, so we don't have to spend money for doing that. It's already been highly reviewed by the peer review. So we take that due diligence cost off of the table and we put it now in an arena where the global community can either push it forward, can help endorse it, can help fund it, and that all will get managed on the blockchain, which is a really fascinating usage of taking a grant application and then utilizing that grant application in the global community to move that application forward and then utilizing the blockchain to facilitate all of that interaction. Okay, so we go from the intellectual properties to grants to free lab equipment. And similar to the intellectual property model, we simply go out to organizations and say, hey, take your decommissioned lab equipment and throw it onto this platform and make it freely available to researchers around the world, particularly those in economically developing areas of the world. And now they can come in and say, wow, there's an electrophoresis machine. It's free, courtesy of the Ohio State University, great brand for Ohio State, a winner for that researcher, and we help facilitate the movement of that free lab equipment within that particular platform. Then, so now we've got intellectual properties, now we have grants, now we have free lab equipment. Now
I'm
the
sorry, Jason.
researchers,
Sorry, 1 second, just to
yeah,
interject there a little bit. For clarity's sake, when let's say let's say you put up a sequence or what have you, when you say the facilitating the movement, does that mean actually helping these physical objects be shipped to another place, or is it that
that
there's infrastructure that there's like a technician on one end and you can request things to be run through that?
yeah. So this particular feature of the platform is essentially, think of it as a Craigslist, and
Perfect. Okay.
so we're hosting it for free. But this is where the science coins come in. And so when we talk about the science coins, we can revisit this lab equipment side and why that's a very interesting particular part of the model. Uh, then a key piece of this entire puzzle is our discussion forums. We've spent a couple of years and a stupid amount of money, much more than I ever anticipated, putting together not just this platform, but this marquee feature of these discussion board forums. And I don't have any dog in the fight at Reddit. I haven't shorted them. I'm not long. I don't have any dog in that fight. But they have 28 million registrants in the science Reddit. But if you look at it, there's almost no activity there. And part of that is because to use it is so onerous. The rules to use it are crazy. And let me just give you an example. I posted a paper. The paper was 7 or 8 months old and it got pulled. So I sent the moderator a note and I said, what happened? And the moderator came back and said, well, if you read the rules, you'll see that you can't post anything older than 6 months old. And I said, well, that doesn't make much sense because this is a paper that could have very significant implications and may never have been seen here. They banned me. They banned me for that.
That's
And
insane.
then, yeah, and then I was talking to another one of our advisors who's a chair of a very significant university department, and almost exactly the same thing happened to her. So she said, I'm not staying there. And so they have 28 million members there, very little interactivity relative to that, versus coming to Therapoid and interacting with this particular forums, which are now tied to intellectual properties, tied to grants, tied to free lab equipment, tied to preprint server. And so the centerpiece of Therapoid are the discussion forums, and everything branches out from that communication environment. So the preprint server is coming online shortly, but intermediarily, we have something called a knowledge resource center. So remember that micrograph of this particular brainstem that you took a picture of? You can
Yes.
post that in this knowledge center under a Creative Commons license and make it available to everybody. You get your brand recognition because you got attribution, but now you make it freely available to the world. It could be class notes. It could be a presentation you put together. It could be whatever it is that you think has scientific value to share with the world. And then we have adjacent to that knowledge center where you post whatever you think the world might be interested in scientifically. Then we have this preprint server. Come back for just a second to the forums. And we haven't rolled this out yet, but I think I can disclose it now. When Jelani is on a message board and you take time to create content, and I'm not throwing a dart at any of the social media organizations out there that take in your content and give you nothing back for it. In our model, because it's open source, our philosophy is if Jelani comes in, he creates content, he makes the organization more valuable. He should receive something for making the organization more valuable. And the way that we handle that is in the discussion forums, you created some content, and let's say you put out a pretty good idea. The community can say, wow, that's a pretty significant idea. I'm nominating it for a DOI. Now we can go in and assign DOIs to the content creators within the forums. Nobody's ever done that. That is a significant thing to tell a researcher, share your information, you get DOIs, and as we all know, DOIs help our ability to be seen, it helps our ability to get career movements, it helps our overall CV, curriculum vitae, for who we are as a researcher in the world. So this DOI thread that we've moved through this is grant applications can be DOI, forum discussions can be DOI. Preprint server papers obviously can be DOI, but also things loaded into the Knowledge Resource Center can be DOI. So all of that's nominated by the community. We as a company have no jurisdiction at all within the operations of the cover of the platform other than enforcing the rules. Other than that, the community does everything. So it acts kind of as a DAO, again, where it's community driven. Now, all of this, what's really interesting about this entire framework is that this is all scientific proof of work, right? It's all science and it's proven by the community members. Think of them as nodes. They're all doing this proof. They should get something for that. They're making the organization more valuable. That should be rewarded. And so they have the ability now to be awarded science coins for doing that work. You upload a highly rated R01 grant application that was unfunded. That's work. And you get science coins for that upload when the community votes for it. So now you've got these science coins that have this underlying value tied to the work that the researchers do, which is tied now to the value of the organization. So one now can look at the underlying equity value of the organization and say, based on the work done by its members, the underlying equity value goes up, and that pulls with it the underlying token value, which is represented on an exchange. So this creates a double loop positive feedback economic model. And what's really fascinating about this is you upload a piece of lab equipment, you earn science coins for doing it. A Nigerian researcher says, God, I need an electrophoresis machine. Here's one, it's free. I just got to get it from Ohio State to me. I've got science coins. I'll utilize my science coins as the methodology for transaction. So you're able to create this entire internal framework of all of the work that's done to be represented not only in the science coin utility coin token, but also in the underlying equity of the company, which ultimately should be represented on an exchange publicly, where now you have these two particular utility token tied to the equity value. And under the positive feedback loop, the more the researchers create value, the more they receive in the value, and the more that value is represented in their wallet, so to speak. So the science coins are a really intricate part of the underlying tokenomics, if you want to call it such, of the work that's done in making this a valuable platform. So instead of exploiting the research community, we all know publishers who even charge the authors for the papers they publish. And what a great business model, right? You bring content in and they pay you to take in the content because your career is sort of tied to being published in that particular journal. Beautiful business model, but very exploitational. In our world, in the Therapoid world, it's not exploited. It's just the inverse. The value that's generated actually comes back to the creator of it. And then if you want to go to an open access journal and they charge an APC, article processing charge, you utilize your underlying science coins that you earned through the development of that journal article in Therapoid to pay for that APC. For a Western researcher, may not care. But to that researcher in South Africa, that may be a game changer. So,
This is beautiful.
so Therapoid is really designed to get us from unused value of knowledge all the way through to the distribution of that knowledge in a peer-reviewed way, than which the value of getting from that unused intellectual property to that journal article distributed to the world, all of that value in the ecosystem is realized by the participants that created it.
No, this is beautiful. The architecture, the interwoven aspects of this platform kind of they directly address all of the claims that DeSci is bringing to the world, right? The peer reviewing by making it open access and allowing all participants to view and specifically value or add a value or add their representation of a value for that piece of science that is presented. The early publication model that can be used with the platform, the credentials via the DOI, which again is founded or put forth by the community's consensus, the granting, both from the science coin but also the other pathways. It's the entire Therapoid platform is very comprehensive in addressing a lot of the pain points in the scientific world. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
And we've done a couple of other unique things, and we've used blockchain in here, and we're not a blockchain company. Uh, We utilize blockchain technology, but we're not a blockchain. I don't get caught up in these, oh, back in the dot-com days, we were an HTML company. And then there was the run for XML. I've just never gotten caught up in those things. We're a company. Our mission is to put out a product that has value to the world, solves problems, and it just so happens that we use these technologies underneath. So you won't see us get wrapped up in all of those things. So we've got some unique uses, though. One will be the provenance of the intellectual properties, right? As those intellectual properties are advanced, all of that advancement occurs on the blockchain. So provenance is going to be trackable. And remember, that's intellectual property. You create a patent. When that patent is awarded or it's a provisional, why doesn't it get a DOI? This is mind-boggling to me. I'm patented. Why don't I have DOIs for this extremely expensive, validated work by the patent office? Mind boggles me. So that'll get DOI'd. So now we're able to DOI the improvements along the way of those intellectual properties. The spin-offs that come out of those unused intellectual properties now have value that's unlocked and stampable as DOIs. I should have said DOIs are digital object identifiers. And these are really important indexing uh, serial numbers, so to speak, so that everything that's valued in an intellectual space, in academia, has a serial number that's unique to that. Okay, so these DOIs now can be tracked that are assigned to the provenance of a piece of intellectual property across its evolution on the chain. And then, of course, you can manage the grants on a chain. We actually filed a patent. Nothing wrong with filing patents, you know. They have a value proposition of validating what you do, particularly to investors. Whether or not you utilize them as a troll is a whole different ballgame. In our case, we did it to prove to primarily our investor community and partner organizations like IPWE. We just did a big agreement with them. And by by doing this, one of the really significant opportunities that we're able to provide is this underlying value proposition to this knowledge. So if you look at grants, there's a lot of knowledge locked up there, but the awarding process from the request for proposals, RFPs, all the way through to the final deliverable of the work that went into the funded project. That entire process is extremely long and very expensive. So what we've done on the grant side is that we've condensed the request for proposal perspective, which just issuing an RFP is not cheap. So we've taken this ability of creating an RFP, communitized it. I don't know if that's a word, communitized it, but we've communitized the ability to create the RFP. So the Gates Foundation can come in and say, hey, we have an idea for doing something with nets using a new nanotube in malaria endemic areas. The RFP for that can be issued by the community, driven by the community creating it. And then everybody can apply for it. Whoever wants to apply for it can apply. The community decides which applications get funded. They can be funded in science coins backed up by the fiat of that particular funding entity. And then we track that entire process across the chain so that when we get to the point of deliverable, everything that happened along that chain was watched by the community and memorialized by that community on the chain. So we're able to take this very expensive, very lengthy process, drop the price down to next to nothing, and condense the time that goes into it significantly. So anyway, I've gone afield there, but that's another utilization of the chain. We have a couple of other things, but I think the other thing that I would really like to put out there about this is that if we look at ourselves as a community, say DeSci or open science, we in order to ever get mainstream, we have to be mainstream. We can't be locked away in a box where we're talking our own language and then we go out and say, okay, guess what world we're here? And nobody pays any attention because, well, you were never out in the community to begin with. And part of that is partnering with like organizations, but organizations that are already out there in the mainstream. We have a tendency to want to like hold things tight and not go out and share and set up standards. And I think this is also something similar in the investment world where we don't engage enough in the investor community. So I think going a little bit here afield, one of the great things about Therapoid is to try and help create with the peer group a way where everybody can contribute to making value of the knowledge that's currently not valued. God, I'm sorry, Jelani, I went way afield there.
Not at all. I think that actually is almost a fundamental point that we're all interested in, right? Because as science, you bring up the fact that there's a lot of things out there that can be alternatively used, and there are a lot of entities that are doing this thing, right? Crowd-funded cures is a good example that are looking to do, repurposing of drugs for alternative therapeutics, but this could be applied to many aspects of science, not just in that, not just from
Ex-
therapeutic perspective, but also just science in general, whether it be physical or all these kind of things. So no, I think
yeah,
that's actually a fundamental point.
yeah, you actually are striking on a fundamental mistake that I made. Uh, this mistake I want to say was driven by my experience as an entrepreneur with a number of startups, funded, a few $1 million. And simplicity is one of the things that drive investment. The more complex it is, the less likely you're going to attract capital. And so if you look at Therapoid, just again, a little side chain, if you look at Therapoid, you only see on the homepage before you register one thing, and that's the forums. That is the center simplicity of Therapoid are the discussion forums. Everything radiates from there. You can join. When you join, you can get a wallet or not get a wallet. When you join, once you're in your profile, you can turn on, you say, hey, I'm interested in free lab equipment. You can select that. And then in your menu line, all of a sudden, free lab equipment pops up. And now you can set yourself up to get alerts when new lab equipment comes in. So the user has the ability to add or subtract what they want to see in the ecosystem. But everybody sees when they start the forums. That is the entry point. And so the failure point that I did with the company was the branding. Uh, because of our history of starting off in the therapeutic space, starting off as a synthetic biology company, focused on going after tumors, we sort of went simplistic here of for focusing only on therapeutic IP. The problem that we ran into is you go into a technology transfer office and you say, hey, we're interested in your unused therapeutic technologies. Well, most of the TTOs don't know what they have in their portfolio across the board, particularly what's unused. It may have been there for 5 years and they just have no idea that it exists. To what about the intellectual properties that could be, as say, an advanced material piece of intellectual property that might have some significant application as a med device or as a diagnostic or as a therapeutic. And the TTO, the technology transfer officer, would know that that advanced material that came out of the engineering department might have that potential application. So what the TTO says is, I don't know how to segregate all of this, so just take all our unused stuff. So now we have these intellectual properties on the platform that may have absolutely no application at all to a therapeutic diagnostic or med device. And so we sort of made it too simple. We should have made this intellectual property effort more broad, open intellectual properties as opposed to open therapeutics. So that was a failure point on my uh, development of this. And now we're going to have to address that at some point because there's already intellectual properties on the platform that go beyond therapeutics.
That's a fair point. and it's kind of hard to foresee these things in the future, although you do have a breadth of experience. And I think it speaks to the fact that we will be making mistakes, and as long as we find ways to correct that, it'll be fine. I don't think your particular mistake, as you call it, will be a big thing. As long as we have conversations and continuous conversations like this, we can go ahead and highlight these alternatives and these different IPs that are used in a variety of fields. I'm sure that'll come about. No problem.
Yeah, and I'm all open, wide open to suggestions on what that should look like uh, out into the global community because of that potential limiting factor that we have today with Open Therapeutics as a brand. So anybody out there that has ideas for how we could reposition this to be all encompassing from anthropology through zoology, uh, you have my attention for sure. And we would certainly attribute any um, suggestion that end up being adopted.
But I will definitely consider that more on our end to see how we can help you with that. Um, I think it's a very important point. And so as we reach the top of the hour, I have one more question that I want to ask you before I open it up to the community to ask whatever questions that they want. And it's that, the open therapeutics platform, at least Therapoid, has been around for a good amount of time. Have there been projects that have been successfully pushed through Therapoid? Can you talk about any of them?
Yeah, so actually, Open Therapeutic, the Therapoid platform has been in development since just before COVID. We survived getting through COVID, so we were very lucky. But what exists today is essentially version point 0.9. And so we haven't promoted it at all. And we've had it up. We have a number of advisors, fairly well positioned people in the space, people similar to you, Jelani. And these people have worked with us in an open way along the path. So we never wanted to close this and be stealth. We wanted to put this out there, get input from the community, and let them see the development along the way. So, yes, Therapoid has been out there, uh, visible to anybody. We didn't market it, but anybody could visually see it if they went out and did a search on uh, open science and intellectual properties. We pop up, you could go take a look and you could help us develop it forward. But there has been no version 1.0 launch until probably 2 weeks from now. We're on the Polygon testnet right now. We should be migrating in 2 weeks. Our audits are done. They were just done yesterday. So we've got an NFT smart contract. In fact, I put a link in the Twitter discussion for the NFT so people can actually see this innovative NFT that we're launching. So the smart contracts have been audited, and now we're migrating from the test net to the main net. Version 1.0 will launch, then we will announce it publicly. But yes, it's been out there, but we've really had it out there so everybody could see it and contribute perspectives.
That's a lot of big information, right? Partnering, not or affiliating with the Polygon chain and then having this NFT. I wish we had more time to talk more about that, but I will definitely, we might have to have a one-off uh Twitter Spaces to kind of go deeper into that because that sounds crazy interesting. Um, Thanks for sharing that. And that's
Yeah.
the link that is posted here at the top, that is pinned at the top of the Twitter Spaces for anybody who's interested in learning more about this. So with that, I'm going to open the floor up to the community. Ed, who is an avid listener, is always around, and much appreciation to you, Ed, for always tuning in. Always has a very pertinent and important question. So I'm just going to bring you up as a speaker, Ed. You can ask your question. Go ahead, Ed.
Ears, more music to my ears. Um, I come from the regenerative ag community, which was basically created by leading farmers, and we're all about open source. We're all about a new way of communicating, sort of the way we have been communicating, which is very open source way. In fact, I'm working on a platform too for us to work even more effectively. And it's been great in the last few years because we finally got attention from major corporations, that what we had been doing on good sized farms between hundreds and thousands of acres was really showing a lot of success. And so we attracted the attention of corporations to come out. And when we talk to them, we find that, what do you need? And it's like, well, what we're trying to do is validate more and understand the science of what we've been doing so that we can have the data behind us to go even farther. And so we've been getting some funding support. And the great thing is, I think from the work on the inside out, it's attracting, that concept's attracting a lot more scientists and researchers. So the quality of researchers and scientists that we've been able to attract into our area has just been stupendous. And so, we really are getting some quality work efficiently now to fill in. We figured out all the little gaps we had, whether it be in metagenomics or epigenetics or in diversity measurements or in nutrient density, all the work that has never been done in the past and are significant projects, we're able to now get, real good collaboration, as I say, top-notch researchers interested in working with us directly. And then, we're putting out all that information, all the groups involved and all the projects involved, we're keeping open source because we believe in the greater good. I mean, that's why we farm, it's not to make money. It's to, not that that isn't important, but the main thing is we need to feed people and we need to feed people good food and all that. We've recognized that for a long time. We've realized a lot of shortcomings in the way it had been done in the past. So, I think we're getting closer and closer together in this, and it's just really encouraging to keep hearing the thoughts from the inside, of scientists and researchers, how they're looking at it. And we're looking at it almost the exact same way, and we're getting closer and closer, and I really appreciate it. So thank you to everybody that's working on this.
Thank you, Ed, for that. And I think, one thing that I personally hope to see moving forward is the layering on of these efforts, right? People who leverage or make use of the Therapoid as an example and layer on their own platforms in and within it such that it's interwoven so it benefits everybody. I think that's what's going to make this space a lot more powerful. And this nature of open access, B Corps. I think there's a really interesting infrastructure that has not previously existed that is going to come into creation as we start to develop these layers. And that's going to, necessitate a whole new version of how we look at these things, how, incentivization, rewards, income, all these things play together. But I think this mismatch, not this mismatch, but this mashup of all these different platforms is going to be a beautiful thing that really helps drive science forward. So with that, Jason, I can sit to speak with you for hours on end, and as a matter of fact, I'll probably give you a shout sometime soon to learn more about these NFTs and just the progress, and just sit down and talk with you because I do consider you a friend. Is there any parting closing statements you would like to give as we close off this space?
Yeah, just one thing. I think for us in the DeSci world, in the open science world, I think it's really important that we connect to the public. One of the biggest failures that we have as an organized or disorganized, but culture of science is that we suck at communicating with the public. And what we see happening in the United States, in particular, regarding, I don't want to say attack on science, but it's an attack on science, is because we've done such a poor job communicating to the public the science that we do in a way that the public can have an understanding. And I think that until we figure out how to do that, we're going to continue to struggle with things like budgets. We're going to continue to struggle with things such as misinformation, where somebody drinks a disinfectant because they think it'll kill COVID. we just have to do a better job. And one of the underlying missions of Therapoid is that it has a public leaning environment where the public can listen, watch, interact with those that are doing the science, and they can see the science that's being done. They can contribute money to projects that they can watch being done. And so I think this ability to have the public, which currently is disassociated from the science culture, to literally become a front row seat in the conduct of the science will help us drive a more science fact-based society than what we're experiencing today, the attack on scientists and the underlying work that they do. And I just from a caveat, I love, sadly, to watch a pundit on a network say there's no climate change, and especially there's no anthropomorphic, human-driven climate change. And it amazes me how many of them have PhDs. They've done 30 years worth of bench level work. They've got 15 publications. I'm being sarcastic because they don't, right? But they have an audience that they can simply say, well, this doesn't exist. And all of a sudden, all of the work that's been done, that's peer reviewed, that the vast majority of the scientific community recognizes is undone, not even looked at. And so one of the great mission opportunities for Therapoid and the open science world, the DeSci world, the open access world, is to be a public leaning face to help get rid of misinformation.
No, and that's a very great point. And you see this dichotomy. Most influencers are not experts. And people tend to follow the influencers because they have a way of making things or making themselves either they're charismatic or they're more appealing, but they're not the experts. And science is nefarious. Science TM, science as an industry is nefarious to have this, like you said, this I don't know, issue or the stigma where we don't communicate very well with non-scientists and lay people. But that being said, as you mentioned, open therapeutics, the commons aspect of open therapeutics, I think is going to go a long way, excuse me, in helping that. We at DeSci World, that's basically our whole model, right? Is to bring to the public and lean into the community and help spread the going ons of DeSci. So I'm very much on board with everything that you've just said. I think it's a critically underserved or underrated aspect that we hope to build up and make more fundamental to how we do science in the future.
Yeah, I'm appreciative to what DeSci World does. It brings kind of that focal point of standardization and what's going on out there, so that it becomes that one-stop shop where everybody can take a look at what's going on out in the space on the project side. And this is one of those things that really desperately needed to be done. And I'm glad you stepped up and were able to get it.
I appreciate the kind words, sir. Again, right back at you. The things that you're doing, I think, are going to change fundamentally how we do science, and even within DeSci, how we operate in DeSci, because we do lack a certain level of organization, and having these platforms and organizational leadership from people who have years of expertise. Ed, you're another person who I consider under this. Your years of expertise in your field are going to be crucial to helping us move forward and actually make this revolution, the scientific revolution, a thing. Oh, Ed, sure, go ahead. I'm gonna bring you back up, Ed, if you have another comment. Go ahead, Ed, if you want to say something else.
Oh, when you hit me to speak, I didn't hear what you said because there's always about a 5, 6, 7 minute thing between. But I think it was a final comment. Yeah, one thing, and of course we don't have time to really talk about it, but we kind of have a different approach on organization. We sort of consider ourselves sort of the beginning concepts of Web3 or something. The way I often put it is that our network of farmers working on this, of leading farmers, is extremely well organized without major organizations. We find that the independence of working together, I mean, we have no problem working together. We have no problem making decisions, validating through peer to peer within our groups. But we worry a little bit about leadership because that tends to be people that can dominate for whatever reason. And that often doesn't involve some minority thoughts involved. And sometimes those thoughts end up being really the answer. So we kind of have a little different approach in sort of the leadership concept in the advanced, developed organizations. We see the larger those because we experience it. Many of the large organizations that want to support climate change or whatever, they're so bound in bureaucracy. Science is moving way too fast for many of them to keep up with, and the processes that they have to go through. I mean, that's been mentioned in this talk, about the time. So what happens with corporations with us, they come out and see what we're doing on a farm, and they're like, so what could we support right away because we like what you're doing? And we're bypassing that whole outreach thing because we develop a relationship. So we're constantly aware of what each other are doing. And so I'm just throwing that in. It's something that, we're trying to understand better. How do you become really effective and really efficient in a world where everything is happening so fast? So I just want to throw that comment out. Thanks for this space. It's always great.
Absolutely, Ed, and thank you for bringing it up. You bring up a lot of good points usually. As a matter of fact, Ed, when we get off this thing, just shoot me a DM, and I'd like to talk to you more. So with that, again, Jason, thank you very much. Your insight is always invaluable, and I think your expertise is going to be invaluable for this space. To everyone else who's been listening, and everyone who's going to listen to the recordings, which will be up on YouTube and soon to be up on other podcast streaming platforms, thank you for tuning in. Um, your presence is always appreciative. Please feel free to go and investigate. Look up Therapoid on your own. Click on the links. Find out what they're doing. You're interested in DeSci World, please do so the same. If you would like to support each of these platforms, you can register on Open Therapeutics and shout them out. You can come to DeSci World and join us in our Discord. We have a microbe NFT, which grants you MVP status within our ecosystem and an upcoming ecosystem. So that's a great way to support our initiatives. And so with that, I'd like to thank everybody again. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on our next episode next week, next Friday, 12 p.m. EST, for DeSci Rising episode 11. So again, everybody have a great weekend. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.